Baruchot habaot, ladies, and thank you so much for coming out on this Sunday night, right after Lag BaOmer, and joining us here today at the Glick Residence in Teaneck, New Jersey. And also we want to say hello to the viewers on Torah Anytime. Tonight we are having an informal gathering where everyone gets to sit around the table, and we're gonna come here. There's a seat next to me. How you doing? Good to see you. What's up? First of all, I want to say that this shiur is for the refuah shlema of Sararina bat Yoliba,
my back neighbor,
and the Tinoket bat Shoshana, as well as her mother Shoshana bat Tzvi Yehudit, and Yitzchak ben Lubi. They should have a refuah shlema. And also, of course, this is not of course, it's unfortunate, but this shiur is also dedicated Leilui Nishmat Ravital Tzipora Bat Simona and Johnny, who I heard just recently was the shloshim of this young woman who died and unfortunately was snuffed out before her time. Kadosh Baruch Hu should give her an aliyat neshama.
Amen.
And in the zchut of you taking upon yourself certain things that you're going to learn tonight, this should elevate her neshama more and more, and she should find peace began Eden. This week's parasha is Parashat Behar, and it discusses a law that doesn't really apply today, although it does have some application in thinking and in an attitude which still holds true today. The law I'm referring to is the law of Yovel. What is Yovel? You see, there was a 50-year cycle that Bnei Israel had to adhere to. On Yom Kippurim, on the 50th year, they would blow the shofar that would signal different events that took place. And one of the most significant events that took place in the Yovel year was that all the Jewish slaves that worked for Jewish masters had to be set free. You see, there was a concept of owning a Jewish slave. But the halacha doesn't permit us to keep a Jewish servant forever and ever. There comes a certain time when the slave has to go free, and that happens in the Yovel year. Now, there's a very interesting story in the Navi concerning Yirmiyah HaNavi, alav shalom, who lived during the end of the first Bet HaMikdash. And he rebuked the people because they were not freeing their slaves. He'd get up and he'd say, "This is terrible. Hashem is going to punish us. He's going to throw us out of the land. It's going to awaken the animosity of our enemies." So in the beginning, the Jews were a little scared, and they let their slaves go. But when the Musar wore off, like it usually does after a while, they took their slaves back. The rest is history. As a result of this, our enemies attacked, and eventually the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, and Am Yisrael went into exile. So I want to share with you some interesting facts that one of the Chachamim discusses concerning the law of Yovel and the freeing of slaves. First of all, when was this law given? This law was given immediately after the Jews left Egypt. So Chachamim wonder, I mean, not to minimize this law, but that was the first law that was taught. Aren't there so many laws that are far more important than releasing a Jewish slave? So Rabbanim explained that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that since we just came out of Egypt, we'd be able to relate to the feeling of being a slave. So when you tell someone who was just freed after 210 years of bondage that he should release his slave in the Yovel year, he could understand, he could agree, he could relate to the fact that keeping a slave for so long, it's unhealthy, it's incorrect, it's not appropriate. So therefore the timing of the law was to impress upon the Jewish people how important it is to let the slaves go, since they themselves went through such a situation. That's number one. Secondly, we blow the shofar on Yom Kippurim of that year, of the 50th year. The shofar is like the bell that sounds, that lets all the slaves know, you're free. It also lets the masters know that they have to set them free. But why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu choose Yom Kippurim as the day to sound off the shofar for the sake of the slaves? Well, as you can well imagine, because on Yom Kippurim, everybody feels spiritually uplifted. If there's one day in the year that you want to do the right thing, it's on Yom Kippur. Never mind the other 364 days, but at least that day, you're in good standing with Hashem. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu used this holy day in order to motivate the masters into setting the slaves free. HaKadosh Baruch Hu dafka chose Yom Kippurim when the master is in a kind of religious mood, and this way it'll be easier for him to let his slaves go. That's number 2. Thirdly, the law applies throughout the land of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbanim explained that it was dafka done this way where everyone had to free their slaves at the same time. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make it easier on the master, that when he sees everybody else is also doing it, he'll feel better about it. It's psychological. So notice how many things are being done over here in order to make it easier for the slave master. Question is, why are so many incentives necessary to get someone to free his slave? Especially if that slave is a fellow Jew. And still in the times of Yirmiyah Navi, they couldn't do it. What do the Rabbanim tell us?
What do you mean they couldn't do it?
They couldn't let the slaves go free. We're going to get there. We're going to explain. They couldn't do it. They had a problem with it.
Oh, it's not that they couldn't, like...
They couldn't do it. No, they couldn't do it. They couldn't bring themselves to do it. Yeah, why? Rabbanim say, control. Control. People have a difficult time giving up control. This is a big yetzer hara in many people where they feel a need to dominate others and place power over others and manipulate them. It's hard for them to give up that yetzer hara of controlling another human being. We don't see that in the slave-master relationship because we don't have that today. We don't have slaves and we don't have masters. But we see it...
We have bosses.
Oh, so that's it. The Chachamim say we see it in many marriages. We see it between parents and children. The reverse is true as well. We see it happen with children and parents where the child is the one exerting control over the parent. We also see it in a work setting, like you said, between an employer and his employee. We see it in friendships where friends try to control and even dominate each other. Even in our own communities, we see families destroyed because one of the family members is unbearably controlling. Now, I want to point out that usually people who have this yetzer hara of dominating over others, controlling them, manipulating them, and exerting pressure over them through intimidation and all kinds of tactics, through guilt, these people are usually the weakest in character.
Bullies.
They're bullies. It's not a sign of strength. Chachamim tell us that it's actually a sign that the person is covering up his own weakness and his own inadequacies. So in reality, that person is getting a good feeling by dominating someone else because at least there's somebody out there who he thinks is weaker than him. But Chachamim tell us, Ezehu Gibor, who is strong, we assume it's a king or a dictator that rules with an iron fist over everybody. He's the strong one. But the Torah says no. That person is weak and he's simply addicted to power. He needs to fill the vacuum in his heart, so he does it by exerting control over other people. Ezehu Gibor, hakovesh et yitzro. You know who's strong? Someone who's able to control himself. A strong person is the one who's able to exert control over his own personal life. Such a person is able to limit where he goes, what he says, what he writes. He doesn't have that need to exert control over other people. And that's the Yetzer Hara of those masters who couldn't let their slaves go free. They couldn't live a life without manipulating and controlling something or somebody. Why? Because they thought to themselves, I mean, what do you mean let them go? Who am I going to control if I let them go? Who am I going to manipulate every day? Who am I going to yell at every day? Who am I going to vent at? You're taking away my drug over here. The control is the addiction. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tried to make it very easy for the slave masters. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was being a master psychologist, and with tremendous wisdom, he was attempting to get the master to give up that control. We have to understand that this is especially true in families where growth and change can only take place through love. If it's through control, if it's through intimidation and fear, it's one of the most unhealthiest grounds to foster any kind of love. So whether it's in a marriage, in parenting, in friendships, or at work, you have to be careful. As parents, you have to guide your children, and you're allowed to, and you're supposed to give your opinion, by the way. You're supposed to. You're meant to have discussions with your children. But you have to be careful that people around you shouldn't be left with the feeling that it's a dictatorship, where it turns into pachad, and then the children fear getting close to you. So although the law of Yovel does not apply today, the concept behind it certainly does, and it's something that we all have to consider. Now, the next question is, after the slave is freed, where does he go? Where does he go? The pasuk says, "Ve'ish el mishpachto tashuv." The Torah HaKadosha makes it a point of informing us that he goes back to his family. Very good. Give her a lollipop. Do we have any lollipops here? Now, this 50th year of Yovel isn't only about slaves going home. There are other laws that kick in the 50th year. One of those laws is that any property sold in Eretz Yisrael, believe it or not, returns to its original owner in the 50th year. Could you imagine? All the lands, all the transactions, let's say you sold a piece of property, on the 50th year, it goes back to you. Comes back to you. It becomes null and void in the 50th year, that transaction. And the halakha also tells us that on that year, the farmers were not permitted to work the land. In other words, think about it. On the cycle of the 7th year of the 7 years of Shemitah, every 7 years we have Shemitah, but then we have 7 cycles of Shemitah, which is the 49th year of the cycle, and then we get to the 50th year. There was a 2-year period where you just sat around watching the land grow fallow. Now you could imagine the social upheaval that was taking place already on the 50th year. Picture the scene. You got to picture the scene. You had slaves all over the land being set free. Property and transactions are being returned, and the economy is at a halt. The place is going wild. But with all that social chaos that was taking place in the 50th year, the Torah reminds us that our definition of freedom is not the same as that of the Gentile world. I'll give an example. In the 1960s, the liberals came along with their interpretation of freedom. Authority was rejected in the 60s, and the popular slogan at that time was, "Do your own thing." It even became a song. Children left their families at a young age. There was no real discipline or any real restrictions in that generation. And what was the legacy of that generation of the 60s? The children of those 60s people who lived and believed in such a concept suffered the consequences. The children were the ones who became the drug addicts and the derelicts of society later on in life. Violence was predominant. There was a lack of kavod within families and very little deference to authority. So the Torah is telling us that freedom doesn't mean that you can now do whatever you want because you were set free. In that 50th year of the Yovel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you're free now, true, but go back to your family. Go back to your family. The Torah reminds us at that point when the slave is freed that freedom doesn't mean, super, this is my chance to run away from home. I'm running away from my wife and my children. No, freedom doesn't mean that you tell your parents, I'm older now so I could do whatever I want and you can't tell me what to do. Lefech, you free? Good. Now you could go back and respect your parents on a whole new level, because in our Torah, grandparents and parents were revered. There was loyalty between spouses. There wasn't a world of reckless freedom where after all the chaos, homes are being torn apart. This is called hefkerut. That's why Chachamim explained that the letters of the word cherut, which means freedom, also spelled the word charut, which means engraved. The word charut was used in reference to the luchot habrit. The luchot were charut, they were chiseled and they were engraved. So Chachamim made a play on words. Charut equals cherut. It was a lesson to all of us that by following the Aseret HaDibrot that are engraved, that are charut, it's going to bring you to the ultimate cherut. That's what's going to bring you to the ultimate freedom. So the Torah's understanding of freedom means that there's kibud avayim. Freedom means that you don't murder. Lo tirtzach. It means you don't steal. Lo tignov. Freedom means the freedom to do what you're required to do. It's not freedom to do what you want to do. Freedom to do what you want to do is called recklessness. You're just being a slave to your own desires. You're a slave to your passions because you have you don't have control over yourself. That's not freedom. You might be free as a bird to come and go as you please, but in reality, you're really just a mere eved to your own desires. The Yetzer Hara is simply pulling you by the leash, and you go wherever he wants you to go. But that's not freedom. You just went back to being a slave. So who's really free? Somebody who has the courage to respect his parents is really free. Somebody who is able to control his social behavior, he's free. Someone that doesn't take items that don't belong to him, someone who guards the mitzvot, is free. And even though it appears as if that person is so restricted and confined, no, Chachamim tell us he's the freest of all people because he does what he's supposed to do. And that's the Torah's understanding of freedom. Freedom is granted to a person who truly wants to follow in the ways of the Torah. So in that year of freedom, Ish el mishpachto tashuv, you had to go to strengthen and preserve family life, because without that, true freedom cannot exist. You with me? Yes, no, maybe so. Yes, yeah.
People were sometimes became just Jewish slaves because they stole. So maybe this was like a punishment to them, that they thought not keeping the mitzvos maybe is freedom, and then they became enslaved to someone.
Correct, but here's the thing with the Jewish slave, lemashal, there's two laws concerning the Eved Ivri. First and foremost, he can only be a slave to you for a matter of, I think, up to 6 years. Yeah. And then he has the option. If he wants to leave, he could leave. But if he wants to stay, then you know that whole halakha, you have to take him to the doorpost, you have to pierce his ear. But then, even if he wants to stay, you must let him free in the Yovel year. He cannot stay with you forever. Because the Torah is telling you that actually, why do we pierce his ear by the doorpost? That's a punishment. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu tells that Eved, 1 second, you're not meant to be an Eved your whole life. You learned your lesson, you paid your dues, Now it's time for you to go and build your own life. If you want to continue to be an Eved, it means you didn't rise to the occasion. Who wants to stay an Eved his whole life?
Also, it's the halacha, like if you have a slave, you have to, if you sleep in the comfortable bed, he has to have to sleep in the same as comfortable bed. You only have one, he is the one who's supposed to get it. So there's an expression, if you buy a slave, you actually buy yourself a master.
Correct. You have to treat him with tremendous respect because there's an entire psychology behind the rehabilitation of that slave. Meaning, he's not there just to serve you. You are there to serve him. You have a job to do, and that job is to rehabilitate him so he can become a better person after what he did. If you want more details about it, on Torah Anytime, where I give lectures, there's a shiur about the whole subject of the Eved Ivri under Parashat Mishpatim. So you could watch it. It's very, very interesting. But anyway, getting back to our program here, but it's a great insight that you just gave us. Moving on in the parasha, we learn about the laws of usury. Usury is business related. Anybody who's in business here, it's the laws that concern, for example, not overcharging for an item or not misleading the customers. One has to be very honest in his business dealings, and there are very strict laws on how you're supposed to conduct yourself in business. Now, of course, this would be more applicable to the men who are involved in commerce, but there's one halakha that applies to the ladies. From this week's parasha, we learn that as a customer, we're not permitted to mislead a merchant into thinking that we're interested in purchasing an item, when in actuality we have no intention of buying that item. Which means you're allowed to walk into a store and ask for prices if you're really interested in that item, vadai. However, if you already bought that item in another store, and then you see that same item in the store window of the second store, you can't walk into that second store and ask the owner for the price just to see if you got a better deal somewhere else. Why? Why? Because the Torah takes sensitivities into consideration. Because when you're going to ask the merchant the price of that item, the merchant is going to become excited and he's going to think, oh, maybe I'm going to make a sale today. And that's asur. It's asur. You hear this? So whenever we learn these laws, we have to imagine, Chachamim say, that you're standing on the other side of the counter. If you were this business owner, imagine yourself as the merchant. How would you feel? So the pasuk says that we're not permitted to commit an act of usury. But then at the end of the pasuk, it says, Al tonu ish et achiv. Al tonu ish et achiv. Do not cheat each other. And then the pasuk says, Vayereta me'elokecha ki ani Hashem elokechem. And you must fear your God, for I am Hashem your God. What is this pasuk teaching us? Well, I heard a very interesting explanation as to why this pasuk specifically mentions fear of God. V'yareta me'elokecha. Chachamim explain that only Hashem knows that you are misleading the merchant and what's really taking place in your mind when you're asking that question of how much does this cost. The merchant does not know. The salespeople don't know. Only Borei Olam knows that your true intention isn't to purchase that item. And that's where your Yirat Shamayim has to kick in. You should fear Hashem because you shouldn't think that no one is ever going to find out what your true intention is when you ask that question. So Hashem is dafka reminding you. From here we see that fear of God is not a bad thing. On the contrary, Yirat Shamayim could be extremely constructive because knowing that Hashem knows what we're thinking makes us people who are more aware of our actions. And because we have that awareness, we might not come to the place where we're compromising our faith. We won't do things with the attitude of, well, anyway, who's going to find out if I do this? Who's watching? Who's listening? Who's nobody? No, Yirat Shamayim by the way, isn't in order to instill fear in a person so he should start shaking and get all uptight and tense. No, lehefech. It's just the opposite. Yirat Shamayim makes a person a lot more ethical. It causes them to act more appropriately and with more honesty because he knows that somebody's watching. Al tonu ish et achiv. You still with me?
Yes.
Good. Any questions? Good. Later in the parasha, the Torah Kedosha mentions the laws of ribit, interest. The Torah Kedosha informs us that it's a mitzvah to lend money to somebody who's down and out. But you're not allowed to charge interest. And you should know that the punishment for charging interest is extremely severe. The Gemara of Ketuvot says that people who charge interest are not going to experience Tchiyat HaMetim. Now, it's very difficult to understand this Gemara because I'm going to lose my ability to be resurrected because I charged interest. How do you explain this? What's the connection between charging interest and Tchiyat HaMetim Bechlal? You're not going to believe it. When someone borrows money, he has a hard enough time paying you back that loan. But now he also has to worry about paying back an additional 10%, or 20%, and in some cases with the loan sharks, 30%. And eventually he finds himself buried in debt. The person feels like he can't climb out of that pit. He's busy paying back the interest and he hasn't even arrived at paying the principal loan. That person becomes buried and there's no way he could get out. So the Torah warns us, you loaned someone money and you buried him in debt and you didn't give him a chance to get out. So when they bury you, you won't be able to get out either.
Wow.
That's going to be a midah keneged midah. Therefore, the Torah goes to extreme lengths to warn us against charging interest. So there is an amazing story. There's an amazing story told from the Khatam Sofer alav shalom. He was once in his office, and a wealthy man came to him and started to cry to him. And he said, Kvod Harav, my business took a turn for the worse, and there's so many people I owe money to. I can't pay them back. And they don't know it yet. They don't know that I'm in bad shape. If chaz v'shalom, this information gets out and I default on even one of my loans, my reputation is going to be destroyed and I'll be ruined. And now there's a show in the city of Leipzig, and every year I go to this trade show. If I don't show up, everyone's going to suspect that something is wrong. So the Khatam Sofer said, so what's the problem? Just go to the show. And the man says, Kvod Harav, I don't have the money to go. So the Khatam Sofer felt so badly for him. What did he do? He walked over to his personal safe, pulled out his savings, handed the guy 100 gold coins, and he said, listen, I'm giving you my personal savings. I want you to take it. I hope you're going to be successful, and may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless you that you should earn a lot of money at this trade show. Anyway, the man felt very badly, and he said, Kvod Harav, listen, I didn't come here to borrow money from you. I just came here to share my feelings with you, to share what's been happening in my life. I don't feel comfortable taking your money. But the Rav said, no, I want you to take the money, and I have faith that you're going to pay me back. So the man went to the show, and while he was there, somebody offered him a deal on coffee. And he invested. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, the coffee market began to soar. The coffee stocks rose, and the man sold his shares for a tremendous profit. So of course he realized it was because of the bracha of the Khatam Sofer, and he took his profits and he started to make a small fortune for himself. He became, again, rich kind of overnight. And then he said to himself, I'm so grateful for what the rabbi did for me, that he gave me his own savings and had faith in me. I have to go back to thank him, and I have to buy him a gift. Now the Khatam Sofer was a maven in diamonds. He knew everything about the diamond business. So the man decided to buy him a beautiful diamond that he'd appreciate. So he comes into the office of the Khatam Sofer and he says, Kvod Harav, first of all, here are the 100 gold coins that I borrowed from you. I'm so happy that I could pay you back. I want to thank you so much for the loan. And secondly, here's a diamond. Matana, it's a gift for you. The Rav took the diamond. Oh, he started to examine it. He was amazed. He said, wow, this is almost a flawless diamond. It's beautiful. It's so clean. It's the closest thing to a perfect diamond. What an amazing diamond this is. And he continued to give compliments on this diamond. And then he said, I can't keep this diamond. So the man was taken aback. And he said, but Rabbi, I bought it for you as a token of my appreciation for your bracha and for the chesed that you did with me. And the Khatam Sofer said, you don't understand. I gave you that money as a loan. I am not allowed to accept a gift from you because it could be considered interest on that loan. So although I appreciate the gesture, please keep this diamond for yourself. Now after this incident, the students who observed the whole thing, they came over to the Khatam Sofer and they said, the Kvod Harav, listen, we understand that you didn't want to accept interest on the loan. Makes sense. But what was that entire business of sitting there for 10 minutes praising the beauty of the diamond? How beautiful it was, how clean it is, no flaws, no inclusions. It's not very rabbi-like to sit there and spend all that time praising a materialistic item. Why'd you do that? And the Khatam Sofer said the following. He said, my dear Talmidim, there is a mitzvah in the Torah to lend our fellow Jews money without interest. It's a mitzvah. Businessmen are able to fulfill this mitzvah every single day. But when does a rabbi ever have an opportunity to lend money without interest? But here, I was able to fulfill this mitzvah. So in all the excitement, I began to praise the diamond because it's this diamond that allowed me to fulfill this mitzvah without charging interest. Because he offered me the diamond and I was able to turn him down and tell him, please take it back. So it's because of that diamond that I was able to fulfill this mitzvah to its fullest capacity.
You're saying it's a mitzvah to loan someone money
without interest.
But I would think it's the Aveira to charge.
Right.
You're saying it's actually a mitzvah?
It's a mitzvah to loan without interest.
It's
mitzvah ta'aseh.
It's a
mitzvah ta'aseh to loan money, and then it's mitzvah lo ta'aseh
I didn't realize
not to charge interest.
attached to it.
Okay, so, but anyway, so the Khatam Sofer continues and he says, therefore in the excitement I praise the diamond because it was the diamond that made it all possible for me. This is a level. This is a dargah. This shows us not only the loyalty to the mitzvot, but the attitude that these Gedolim had when they fulfilled the mitzvot. When an opportunity came to do a mitzvah, especially in the area of money, they didn't look at it and say, oh well, we're losing here. I lost a big diamond. We're losing here because I had to give back the extras. And if I wasn't religious, I would have kept the diamond. Right? Think about it. No. Instead, the tzaddikim, they reveled at every opportunity that HaKadosh Baruch Hu presented them to be able to loan money to their fellow Jews. And more than that, not to accept any bonuses. And that meant that the lending was lishma, was pure. And by the way, if anyone is wondering about what the rabbi, the Khatam Sofer, lost, you shouldn't be wondering what he lost. Because I'm sure when the Khatam Sofer reached Gan Eden after 120 years, he probably had a diamond factory waiting for him up there. Right? Moving on, there's a law at the end of the parasha, which again may not be applicable today in practice, but it's applicable in principle. So I'm going to try to give it over to you in the simplest way. Listen to this. It's a fascinating thing. A Jewish man is down and out, so he sells himself as a slave, but to a non-Jew. Okay, to a non-Jew. Again, it's only until the Yovel, because once the Yovel rolls around, the slaves were free. No matter who they were sold to, by the way, whether they were sold to Jews or to non-Jews.
Force non-Jews to free.
So I'll tell you, the Gentiles who lived in Eretz Yisrael also followed the basic rules of the land. Dina de Malchuta Dina. It's like Jews who are living in America. I have to follow the laws of the land. So they follow the laws of the land. But anyhow, the Torah says that it's incumbent upon the family members of this Jew to redeem him from his Gentile masters. Why? Because we don't want a Jew to have to work as a slave for a Gentile for any amount of time. So the Torah demands that if this Jew has relatives, they have to make an effort to redeem him out of his slavery. For example, this is what the Torah says. Let's say that the Goy paid $1,000 for the slave, and there's 25 more years left to the Yovel. Now let's make the calculation. 25 years is left. The guy paid $1,000 for the slave. So according to the calculation, he paid approximately $40 a year for this slave. Now let's say the Jew worked for this guy 5 years. And now the relatives come forward and they want to redeem him. And now there are 20 years left to the Yovel. So you'd have to take into the consideration the 5 years that your relative already worked, and then you pay only what's left over. So you would take the $40 a year times the 20 years that's left in the Yovel year, and you would pay the Gentile $800 for the Jew. Now, obviously, the longer he works for the Goy, the less money you have to pay to redeem him. Okay, that's pretty clear, right? So there's a great story. Listen to this, ladies. I saw this story, and I tell you, I had tears in my eyes. There's a story told of the Chafetz Chaim alav shalom that's based on this halakha that I just told you. The Chafetz Chaim was known to quite often disappear into his private chambers and pour forth from his neshama some of the most heartfelt tefillot to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even though he thought nobody was listening, many of his students would stand outside the room just to get an earshot of how he davened to Hashem. And during one of these occasions, they heard him saying the following words. He said, Ribono shel olam, you created the Torah, but your Torah is very difficult to understand. Baruch Hashem, that the rabbis of the Gemara came along and interpreted your Torah. Baruch Hashem, that they explained it and they made it understandable and even very accessible for some of us. Baruch Hashem, that because of these great Rabbanim, the Jewish people are following the halachot and they're practicing Judaism. But Hashem, what did we get for it? Persecution, massacres, bloodshed. We've been slaves to the Gentiles for thousands of years. We've been oppressed under their governing hand. There's no Jew that's really complete in the galut. We're all broken from all the years of exile. But you wrote in your Torah that if a Jew is held as a slave by a Goy, the closest relative has to come and redeem him. Hashem, you are the closest relative that we have that can come and redeem us from this long and difficult galut. And if your answer is that we don't have enough zchuyot, I have an answer to you, for you, Hashem. And my answer is that you also wrote in the Torah that the longer a slave is captive, the less money one needs in order to redeem him. So after 2,000 years of being slaves, Hashem, the price for our redemption should be very minimal. Even the small amounts of zchuyot should be enough to redeem us at this point, because we've been in the galut and enslaved to the Gentile world for so long. This is how the Chafetz Chaim davened. He used the Torah's words in order to make his points and show Hashem that we're just following your principles. Hear this? There was another story that involved the Chafetz Chaim and the Bet HaLevi, alav shalom. The Bet HaLevi was the Brisker Rav. The Bet HaLevi was once offered to be the rabbi of Brisk. And initially, he was hesitant to accept the position. So a delegation of men came to try and convince him to take the job. And they said, Kvod Harav, you don't understand. There are 25,000 Jews in Brisk that are waiting for you. He said, what? There are Jews waiting for me? Bring me my hat. Bring me my coat. I can't make 25,000 Jews wait. Could you imagine? That's what convinced the Bet HaLevi to become the Brisker Rav, when they told him that there were so many Jews waiting for him. Now, the Chafetz Chaim was there, was present when he heard this conversation. At that very moment, the Chafetz Chaim turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he said, Ribono shel olam, if the Bet HaLevi cannot leave 25,000 Jews in Brisk waiting, how could Mashiach keep millions of Jews waiting for so long? And then he whispered to himself, it must be because the 25,000 Jews in Brisk are genuinely waiting for the Bet HaLevi. But the millions of Jews probably are not really waiting for the Mashiach. Therefore, because we're not really waiting for him, there's no real urgency. But if Hashem would tell Mashiach, listen, there are millions of Jews that are waiting for you, do you think he wouldn't come? The Chafetz Chaim's message was that we shouldn't daven for Mashiach in a manner that's just lip service and nothing more. We want Mashiach, we want Mashiach, we need Mashiach. We actually have to want him to come. And if there was ever a time in history where we appreciate the necessity for redemption, it's in this generation. Because we live in America, and God bless America, but because we live here, we don't sense the urgency of needing the Mashiach. Sure, there are a few very good, sometimes there are inconveniences here and there, here living in America. But in general, we feel that life is quite normal here, whatever you think normal is today. But around the globe, many of our brothers and sisters are not enjoying the same blessed freedom that we're enjoying. We're so occupied with other matters that we don't really give this idea much thought. We have our vacations that we need to tend to, our shopping that we have to get to. We have to get ready for the summer, the bungalow colonies, the camps for the kids, where we're going to vacate at. We're busy with other matters that are far more important in our life. We don't have to worry about Mashiach too now. I have to worry about him too. Of course, he's on our minds here and there, and we want him to come. But in reality, there are far more pressing matters in our life that we're dealing with. Therefore, the Chafetz Chaim was saying that Mashiach cannot possibly come until all the Jews actually want him. I'm going to end with this powerful, powerful story that accentuates this idea, ladies. The great Minchat Elazar, known as Rav Chaim Elazar Shapiro, alav shalom, was the dynamic leader of the Munkach Hasidut in the early 1900s in Europe. And he was known for his heartfelt speeches about the coming of Mashiach, about the Geulah. This is what he preached about. Now, the Minchat Elazar had very close relationships with other great rabbis. And one of those rabbis was the renowned Mekubal, Rabbi Shlomo Eliezer Alfandri, alav shalom, who was known as the Holy Saba Kadisha. The Saba Kadisha was originally the the chief rabbi of Istanbul. And then he made aliyah to Eretz Israel, and he settled in the city of Tzfat. As we know, Tzfat had become the home base of the holy Arizal alav shalom, of Rav Chaim Vital, and many great Mekubalim. Eventually, however, the Saba Kadisha moved, and he lived the rest of his years in the holy city of Yerushalayim. Now, how these two Gedolim came to know each other remains a mystery. Because after all, think about it, the Saba Kadisha was from Istanbul. He was of Sephardic descent. And the Minchat Elazar was living in Europe. He was a Rebbe from the Hasidic dynasty of Munkach. But the Rebbe's attraction to the Saba Kadisha was undeniable. He kept in touch with the Saba Kadisha through letters, and he considered the Saba Kadisha his spiritual mentor. In each of those letters that the Rebbe sent to the Saba Kadisha, it always ended with a request that he should please be allowed to visit him in Eretz Yisrael. But the Saba Kadisha never really responded to that request. Finally, after many years of asking, the Saba Kadisha extended an invitation to the Minchat Elazar to come visit him in Eretz Yisrael. You could imagine how happy he was. And toward the end of the winter of the year 1930, the Rebbe, together with a small entourage of Hasidim, traveled to Eretz Yisrael by boat. It took them 3 weeks. You could imagine the excitement of all those Charedim and Hasidim in Eretz Yisrael when word spread that the holy Minchat Elazar was arriving. They wanted to make a big celebration in honor of his arrival. But the Rebbe, he wasn't interested in all the hoopla. Because what did he come for? He came to visit his mentor, the Saba Kadisha. So the Rebbe tried to avoid all the crowds that were gathered there. And he secretly headed straight to the home of the holy Saba Kadisha. The Rebbe was escorted into a private room, and these two great giants sat down for the first time. The only ones in that room were the Saba Kadisha, the Minchat Elazar, and the Gabbai of the Minchat Elazar, Reb Shon. All of a sudden, the Rebbe gave the Gabbai a knowing glance, and the Gabbai knew, I have to leave the room. He wants privacy. Now, the Gabbai, all these years, always heard his Rebbe speak about the Saba Kadisha in the holiest of ways, and he was so curious to know, what are these two holy tzaddikim going to discuss now? So he put his ear against the door, hoping to get an earshot of this momentous reunion, whatever you want to call a get-together. What's going to happen? They put his ear. And at first there was silence, because these two tzaddikim didn't really share a common language. The Rebbe spoke in Yiddish, and the Saba Kadisha spoke in Ivrit. How are they going to communicate? So going back and forth, they settled on Ivrit, Lashon Kodesh, whatever they could. So the Rebbe began to speak slowly and with a sense of urgency and pain, and he says, Tagid li bevakasha, matai yavo HaMashiach. Please tell me, when will Mashiach finally come? And the Saba Kadisha replied with a very sad look in his eyes, and he said, Yesh mi sheme'akvim et hageula. There are those that are delaying the redemption. Now the Gabbai is listening to this from outside the door, and after a very long silence, he heard something that he writes he'll never forget. Pitom, suddenly he heard the sounds of his Rebbe crying and the bitter sounds of weeping, and then he heard the Rebbe asking loudly, Ha'im gam ani min ha'me'akvim et ha'geula? Am I also from among those who are delaying the redemption? believe this. The Rebbe's tears pierced the hearts of anybody who heard him, and this is what yearning and hoping for the Geula is truly all about. But think about it. The Minchat El-Azar, who was such a holy tzaddik, is asking on himself, am I from those who are delaying the Geula? You are delaying the Geula. You're bringing the Geula. But look how he saw himself. If he thought that about himself, what should we say? We have to ask ourselves if we really do want the Geula, and if we're doing or not doing something to prevent it from happening. As we said earlier, Torah requires sacrifice. It's the only way to live. If you want to live happily, if you want to live with dignity, if you want to live with a certain measure of class, there's no choice but to adapt a Torah lifestyle with all the nuances of being careful, being separate, and following the halakha. And Be'ezrat Hashem, when we're going to be zocheh to remain pure and wholesome, when we truly want Hashem to redeem us, we'll merit to be freed from this long galut. And together, we're going to usher in a new era of freedom. Amen ken, Yehi Ratzon.
Amen. Thank you.
Don't forget, Malka Newman, guys, Torah anytime. I also advertised her what? Listen, guys, on Torah anytime. I advertised the last week already. Malka Newman has an amazing, incredible business. She's what is she? She's a floral designer. She does catering events. She does bar mitzvahs, all kinds of events. She's a party planner also. She makes the most gorgeous bouquets. To the men out there, I say, Shavuot is coming up, Mother's Day is coming up. Buy your wife bouquet of flowers from Malka Newman. I am going to put her number on the screen when we edit this. I don't remember. No, I got 917. Here we go. 917. Malka Newman. Oh, by the way, if you buy a bouquet from Malka Newman or have any event done by Malka Newman, and you call and you say that you're calling from Torah Anytime, you will be receiving a 10% discount. Is that exciting? 917-436-9009. Call Malka and make her day and make your day, because you're going to have gorgeous, gorgeous flowers for the Chag.